Hey everybody, it's Pastor Schoon. I want to thank you for joining me again for this last session this week on this devotional, Rediscovering Awe on a Sunday. I want to tell you a quick story from the Bible, which I think will help as we think about what it means to rediscover something that maybe we've lost over the years or over our time of worship on a regular basis. Or perhaps we haven't been to church in a while, and the memories that we do have, we felt like church was kind of going through the motions, and we want to rediscover what it could be and the power of what it could be. So right on the day of the resurrection, in the evening, Jesus goes in and finds a couple of his disciples who, and when we say disciples, we're not talking about the 12 apostles. We're talking about the wider group of disciples that had either been directly following him or who had been with him for a certain amount of time, but they obviously knew something about him and more than just kind of casual observances. Well, so Jesus has just been resurrected from the dead on that Easter Sunday morning, and he's already appeared to some of the other disciples. So it's about evening time, and there's two of these disciples. They're on the road to Emmaus, which is about 7 miles or so from Jerusalem. So it's a busy road, and so chances are after that weekend, because if we remember the story of the crucifixion, that was Passover weekend for the Jews, so there would have been a lot of pilgrims, a lot of people going to Jerusalem for that weekend. So on that Sunday evening, there was probably a lot of people on that road kind of going back to their towns, whether it be Emmaus or going beyond Emmaus, but there was probably a lot of people on the road. So they're having this conversation. It's dusk, maybe a little darker than that, and so they're talking about the resurrection, or they're talking about Jesus' crucifixion and kind of the sorrow and everything that's going on. Well, so Jesus kind of happens to fall in line with them, and he's like, "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" And they're like, "You don't have a clue what's going on?" And he's like, "Well, why don't you tell me something?" And so they relate the story about Jesus's crucifixion and how he had risen from the dead. Some of the disciples that they knew had already been to the tomb, and they had seen the empty tomb, and that he had appeared to some people, and they're just like, "We don't understand what's going on here," whatever. So Jesus starts talking to them and challenging them on certain things. They don't recognize him. And there's probably a lot of different reasons they don't recognize him. I don't necessarily think it has to be something supernatural about the reason that they don't recognize him. If Jesus truly was a human, and if he had truly gone through the trauma of what the Gospels and the rest of the New Testament relate to us about how badly he was treated on Good Friday, beaten by the Romans, the horror of hanging on a cross and everything that goes with that, and then being dead for 3 days in the tomb, yeah, when he rises from the dead, there's probably still a lot of those marks, a lot of those wounds that are still fresh, and maybe making it hard for people to really kind of recognize who he is. And it's kind of the same way Mary Magdalene in the morning. The Gospel of John reminds us that when she goes to the tomb and sees that Jesus isn't there, she's crying, and she's got a bunch of emotions going on. And so when Jesus appears to her, she thinks it's a gardener. She's like, if you've moved his body. In her grief, she doesn't fully recognize that it's Jesus right there. And so our grief and things that are going on can kind of shield us from being able to fully recognize Jesus. And so it was probably kind of the same way. It's dusk, and so they may not have been able to see his face clearly as they're traveling along. Maybe it's a little darker than dusk. Maybe he's got a hood on, whatever the case might be. But I don't think it necessarily has to be something supernatural that he changed his appearance so that they didn't recognize him. But anyway, so they're traveling along to Emmaus, and he's walking with them, and he's talking, and he's telling them all kinds of different things about the Bible and about Jesus, about himself, and all kinds of other things. We don't know all the things that he's talking to them about. But it's significant enough where when they get to Emmaus, after they've been walking about 7 miles, they're like, we want to talk to this guy more, and we want to know more. This conversation has been fantastic. So they say, why don't you come have dinner with us and just come stay with us for a little while? So he says, okay, fine. So they go to whichever house they're at, and it's when then that they're breaking bread and they're having this fellowship time that they realize that they're in the presence of Jesus, that Jesus has been with them all of this time. And it must have blown their minds that they didn't fully recognize him as they were traveling along. And so the Bible says that the expression they had was, were not our hearts burning when we were talking to Jesus, when we were talking to this guy, and we didn't recognize who he was, but we wanted to know more. And then Jesus leaves them, and they're kind of just at a place, well, what do we do now? I think this is a great example of kind of what happens either leading up to worship or what could happen during times of worship. And if you really want the idea of how to rediscover awe when you go into worship, think about this story from the road to Emmaus when Jesus is with these disciples and they don't even recognize him. How often on a Sunday morning or a Saturday night or over the weekend does something happen, or do a lot of things happen, and it just makes, when you walk into church on a Sunday morning, things just kind of seem out of order and chaotic and not fitting together. And then you come into worship and suddenly your eyes are opened. The pastor says something, the songs that you're singing speak to you, the time of confession says something to you, and suddenly everything stops. Your eyes are opened, your heart is opened, and things are just different now because you've had that time of clarity. Jesus has revealed himself in a way that maybe got lost over the last couple of days or the last couple of years. And maybe this is the first time you've been back in church in a while. And you want to give God that chance. But you don't know kind of how to start things. Worship can open our eyes in the way that those disciples had their eyes opened when they understood that they were in the presence of Jesus. And they probably kicked themselves for thinking, how and why did I not recognize, or did we not recognize Jesus before this moment? But they did. Their eyes were open. And through whatever they weren't understanding who Jesus was, they finally did. And for us, I think, when we step into church, we can ask the Lord, help my heart burn, kind of the way, and not with heartburn, obviously, but the way that those disciples talked about it. Were not our hearts burning? Were we not curious? Were we not just wanting to know more and to have this guy say more to us? That it all seems to make sense, and we don't understand why we haven't been on the same wavelength. We can do the same thing. Lord, open our hearts so that we're curious, so that we can be filled with your presence and your goodness and the wonderful things that you have for us in that same way. That's what worship, if we have the right perspective, can do for us. And then when it's all over, those disciples are like, well, now we need to go and share this, and we need to relate this story. We need to follow up with this. We can't just be the same, and we can't just move on like none of this happened. If worship is powerful and if our hearts are in the right place, then when worship is over, we can't sit and just go on with our life. We're called to do something with the message that we experience, whether it's in the sermon or the confession or the creed that we say or the songs that we sing or the fellowship that we have. We are in the presence of Christ, and we're in the presence of those who follow Christ. And so we should be looking at every opportunity to take that message in a powerful way beyond just that experience that we have with the living and risen Christ during that time of worship. That is how we rediscover awe on a Sunday or whenever we're going to worship on a regular basis. So I hope this has helped, and I hope this week has helped. If you didn't get a chance to watch the other ones, just go to our Facebook or our YouTube page. They'll be there for you to be able to follow up and see how else you can rediscover awe on a Sunday or when you go to worship.